Hello, this is Wes at Bad Seed Games, and today we're going to be going over a little bit of a sort of a ramble, a blog post on what's called kit bashing. Now, kit bashing is something that if you're getting into CG modeling or any other types of VFX work with a 3D modeling package, it's something that you really should start working on as soon as you can because this is something that will save you time in the future. And what it basically is, it's just a collection of parts. Now, the history of kit bashing is, from what little I understand about it, it's got its roots in the old model making communities and the hobbyists, where basically you'd have a whole bunch of, say for example, if you make a model and you have a couple spare parts left over, you'd save those up. And maybe later on down the line, when you have enough spare parts left over, you'd put together something new with the parts that you've got, stuff that you've got in your kit. You'd bash it all together. This has, since it has its roots in the practical effects biz, you might actually have seen some examples of kit bashing. One of them, which, if I recall correctly, one of the most iconic characters from the Star Trek The Next Generation, which is the Borg. If I recall correctly, their first few cubes that were ever made were basically kit bashed, and even some of the prosthetic parts that were attached. Some of them were even kit bashed from other things. Now, this is based on what I heard secondhand, so it may not necessarily be the absolute truth, but that's pretty much what someone told me what kit bashing was in its history, so I'm just going to pass on what I learned. Now, if you have any better information, absolutely post a comment and correct me. I'll certainly re-educate myself. But how does this apply to 3D? Well, 3D with kit bashing is basically if you ever come across a model that you've ever made or in your entire model making history where, for example, you like, say, a character's got a nose that you really liked, or you had an arm or a foot or an eye or some part, or maybe even just like a car door or a couple metal trusses that you built. Chopping them up into pieces that you can use and assemble into other projects is pretty much the fundamental nature of what kit bashing is in this respect. Now, if you can see here, I've got a picture. I've got this arm in here, and this was a part that I sliced off. Now, the part that I sliced off was up to the elbow, right about here. And as you can see, it's basically got the. I then basically added more to it and retopologized it and played around with it since then. But this is pretty much the starting point that I used. Now, I also had a couple other models in what I'm about to show you, but this is pretty much the main thing that I wanted to show you. Now, how would you do this for a kit bashing? I'm just going to unhide everything that I've got in here. Now, as you can see, I've got about 7 characters here, and these were all started with one base model. Now, I did have to go in and remodel a couple things on a couple things, and for example, this character's head here had to be remodeled from scratch. Same with this one, same with these two, because these are the same head. It's just in different configurations as with this one. But you can see that there's a lot of commonality between all of them. Like, they all have the same hands, they all have the same shoulders, they all have the same boots, even though they have been messed around with a bit. But as you can tell, this is basically an entire army of creatures that have been put together from a kit bashing fundamentals. Alright. So, kit bashing, yeah, that's pretty much it for the fundamentals of kit bashing. I'm just going to show you what I've done here. So I'm just going to get out of this here, hide everything else, and make it up there. Alright. So as you can see, this is a character that I'm going to kit bash into another one, and it's going to be, I'm going to use the quickest process that I know. Now, the thing with kit bashing, at least the process that I'm going to show you right now, this isn't going to get you a finalized mesh. You are going to have to go in and readjust some things, you might have to retopologize some things, you might have to tinker around with it, but this process is usually what I use just to get that first step done in as quick of a way as possible. Now, how I do it is I basically use well, I'll just show you. Alright, so when using this particular method, the tools that I use the most are the FFD modifiers in Max. And what an FFD modifier is it's basically just a little cage that you drop in, and you can move the control points around once you've activated control points. And you can then deform the model as needed. Now, this works really great because this is an overall, it's almost like the soft selection, but it's with it's above everything. So you can, for example, if you go ahead and you do that, And if you have like a bazillion different steps and such like that, and you turn it into something that you don't like, you can either just turn it off and delete it. Whereas if you're going to use it in the, if you're going to do this type of process in the actual editable poly, you would probably have to set your undos to fairly high if you wanted to do all that with all the with the equivalent types of tools, such as the soft selection, which is right here. I'm going to show you a bit about the soft selection as well. But this isn't an actual modifier that you're putting on top of it. You're actually reaching in and grabbing everything and moving it all around. So this is a fairly this is a destructive method of adjusting, whereas using the FFD is what's called a non-destructive. So as you can see, it looks like I'm destroying the mesh, but it's non-destructive in that I'm basically preserving it. It's being preserved underneath it, right there. So I'm just going to get rid of that, and what we're going to do is I'm going to take this model, and I'm going to give it a physique that's quite different. So we've got sort of a big, bulky, cartoony, masculine-ish type of figure, and let's go and change that. So, alright, so for the FFDs, unless you want to work with the entire thing, and working with the entire thing on an FFD, even if it's below the even if you go ahead and you move the volume and everything else like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to move this around. Oh, no, I got to do the set volume. Okay. So say if I only wanted to do the abdomen. Well, it's fair enough. It's a good section to work with, and it's good. So let's get this going. Now I don't want to do all of this behind the scenes like I would with some other types of tutorials, because this is pretty much a shooting from the hip thing. Alright, so say that I've got this volume here, and when I go into the control points to modify it, as you can see, when I move this around, it's also moving the rest of the mesh around. So this does have a lot of potential power in it, but it also has its limitations if you're just using it straight on top. So instead of that, let's just get rid of that, and I'm going to go in, and for the polygons that I want to adjust, let's select them. I'm just going to modify them. Let's add these up here. And let's grab, oops. Let's grab that one, let's grab this one. That should get me good enough results. Alright, so first things first, we've got the selection, and now if I go ahead and drop in the FFD 3x3x3, it's, as you can see, it's now basically centered around the highlighted polygons. So this one still needs a bit of adjustment, so let's tweak that out just a bit. Ooh, fun. But yeah, so now that I've got this going, let's go into the control point so I can modify it. Let's look at it in a better view. And I'm going to pull that in. So I slimmed up the and let's pull this in. Just going to make this X-ray and turn off the wireframe so it's easier to see. Now, as you can probably notice, I am doing some actual damage to the actual mesh itself. Now, this is going to be compensated for later, because this isn't going to get you, this isn't like a one-trick that you can use to make your entire process better. This is only going to get you a certain part of the way. Alright, so let's see. Let's double check that. And one thing I forgot to do is I forgot to make a copy of this, so I'm just going to leave that as is. I'm just going to drag this over and clone it and remove the FFD because that will give me something to compare it to. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn off that. There. Alright. So as you can see, just with that one simple step, I've done a fair amount of change and really kind of slimmed up the character's abdomen. Now, yes, it does mean that I've got a lot to fix up, but I'm going to show you a couple tools when we get to that point on what you can do to kind of fix it up a lot quicker. All right, so let's go back here. Now that we've done with this, let's go back into the polygon selection. It's going to select the arms. Make sure I've got all the parts that I want to select. Yeah, that should do it. Alright, and as with before, well, oh, oops. Huh. Yep, I ended up doing something I should not have done. There. Alright. So now that I've got this FFD on here, once I'm finished and I'm ready to go on to the next step, all I got to do is just collapse it to, and we've now saved the changes that we've made. So I'm just going to go back in, redo the arms. And for some reason, when I'm running the screen capture software, the Alt doesn't like working for me very well. So this might be a little slower than what I'm used to working at. Let's see. That's one more. Actually. Let's just toss that. Now at this point in time, I'm basically just falling back on my old, on my modeling knowledge. So pretty much this is where you're going to want to be experienced as an actual modeler, because this is not going to be something that you're going to be able to just pick up and do if you don't understand the fundamentals of 3D modeling. So this is a good tool to know, but it's not going to make you the greatest modeler in the world. This is just going to hopefully shave off some time. Because sometimes if you're working with a pretty harsh deadline, you might end up having to cut some corners. And in this particular case, I came up against a situation where I had a whole bunch of characters that I needed to model. But if I was to actually model them all individually, one by one, from the ground up, that would probably be a couple days, if not a week or two worth of work. So I needed to find a way of actually cutting down the amount of time that it would take to get this stuff done. And this is where the kit bashing came in. Now the source of the arm was pretty much from one of the other characters that I have already made, so I basically took that and I sliced off what I thought I could use and that type of thing. So, and if you're a student just learning, you are in a unique opportunity because you can actually start putting together your kit now. Do it as soon as you can because it will save you time later on down the road. And you never know, if you think about it, that arm that you've sliced off from one of your models, it may not be the A1 greatest, but as long as it gets you a good starting point, something to start off with, a nice little kind of springboard, as it were, that should be enough. So now that I've got that, let's just scale it a bit. So here we are. Down. And as you can see, this shoulder is completely borked. That is okay because I'm going to go in and I'm going to fix that later in the process. So now that I've got that, I'm happy with that. Let's go there. And already you can see that there are starting to become some massive differences. Now, this forearm is still a little bulkier than I'd like, and it's going to want to be moved around. And as well, the shoulders definitely need some work, as with the rear right here. So let's fix that up. Now, how I fix these up, it's actually, this is where your knowledge as a modeler is going to come in handy, because you're going to have access to a lot of knowledge of the 3D modeling program that you're using, so that you can then kind of figure out what you need to do. And the best way of knowing how to do 3D modeling is basically know the tools that you're using, so that you know what tool to use at what particular point, so as to get the most benefit with the least amount of effort. This might seem like I'm encouraging you to cut corners, but that's pretty much going to save your bacon at some point in time in the future, because you might end up having a client that needs you to do a lot of work in a short amount of time, and you don't necessarily have enough time to do it the way you would want to do it, just like to start over from scratch from every little bit. So if you have a kit, and it's a big kit, you can just open it up and say, okay, I like that nose, I like that ear, I like that mouth, those lips are need a little bit more tweaking. You just basically, it's almost like those little toys where it's almost like a Mr. Potato Head in a sense, where you can basically go in and just play around with things and mess around and putting things together in different combinations just to see what goes on and see if you can actually get some good results. Alright, so let's grow that, let's relax that. Alright, so just with a quick couple relaxes, I've actually started doing a lot more steps to make this arm feel a little bit better. Now, as you can see, the shoulder, neck, the trapezius, I believe it's called, it's pretty beefy. It's pretty large for what I need, so let's just go in and smooth that out a bit. Now I'm using a heavy use of the relax tool, and the relax tool is actually quite powerful, but you got to know where it's best to use it, and it's not going to be the most ideal situation for everything that you use. So with the relax tool, this is usually how it comes by default. With a 0.5, one iteration, it's going to hold the boundary points, and that one I'm not 100% sure of. I've not actually used that one that I know of. I'll have to do some research into that one. But alright, so as you can see, as I scroll this up and down, it's relaxing it. And you can even go into the minus. So if I was to give this an analogy to, it would probably be kind of like Photoshop's smooth and sharpen filters, where the sharpen will pretty much make the edges harsher, and the smooth will smooth them out naturally. That's just the amount. It only goes from 1 to -1, but you can also increase the iterations that you want to as many as you want. This one's got 9700, but I'm just going to reset it back down to 1. Alright, so let's grab a couple more. The best part about using this is when you're using the dialogue like this, you can actually go ahead and you can add to the selection, and you can see it update in real time as you go. So that's a little better. Let's apply and continue, and let's move them over just a bit. Let's add that. Now with the hold boundary, outer boundary points, I'm just going to relax, hold and continue on that one. With boundary points, it basically says, okay, do you want to relax things that are on the edge of a polygonal mesh? Now here, as you can see, it's got that little check mark, which means it's going to hold the boundary points. Let's unclick it. And as you notice, this basically moves the edge over a bit. Now you can use this for edge, borders, polygons, vertices, elements, and everything else like that. Excuse me. Oh yeah, this is pretty much what that one does. It just kind of holds the edges in place. Now this is useful because if you have symmetry, and if you undo it, then now you have a hole in the back that you've got to compensate for later. Now it's fairly easy to compensate, especially if you're working with the editable poly with the symmetry on top modifier. So I'm just going to click OK, and I'm going to show you what I do. Since the for all intents and purposes, when we're working with the editable poly, it's only concerned with what is up until its points. So anything above the editable poly, it's not going to really focus anything on. So it's not really going to see that you have this being symmetrical like that. All it sees is that it's an editable poly. Now, how do I usually fix this if I've got it? Now, this is going to be a quick and dirty. I just go into the border. Now, this is assuming that I'm on the 0 world point, because this is only really useful if you are, because I'll show you how it can muck things up. But so I then use the border, and I tell it to select the inside border, which is from the crotch up the back, up the neck, and the head, and down the front. Because that's basically, when you click on the border, you're basically selecting everything that's at the border of that selection of polygons. You can even do it with the edge, and then you just go loop. But I find that the selection's a lot easier. It's just one extra step. Now, when I've got that, if you see over in the Edit Geometry tab over here, let's drag that a few times, right here, you'll see these options: Make Planar, X, Y, and Z. Now, what you're going to be doing with this one is, this is basically the X, Y, and Z will basically reset all of the either the X, the Y, or the Z values to be all the same. It's not going to turn it to 0. It's going to make them all the same. So, for example, with this one, if I'm going X, as you can see, it's going to take the X position of all of the edges, and it's going to make them all uniform. And if you do it with the Y, as you can see, it just made it into a vertical line. With the Z, it made it into a horizontal line. So that's one way of doing it. Now, this is where it comes in handy, having it at the 0 point. Since I now have this border selected, if you look down in the X, it's at point 027. Now let's turn on, and this kind of looks okay, but if we get really close, we kind of notice that there's a bit of overlap. So as you can see, it's extended over. Now, the symmetry modifier does have an option where you can slice along the mirror, and that's what I've currently got set. But I am finicky. So I'm just going to go into the 0.027, and I'm just going to zero that out. That'll put that right back at the 0 world space in the view. So, like, let's drag that out like that. Again, just right-click, it'll bring it over. And that's usually how I fix up any, make sure that the seam along this, where it's being sliced down the middle, I guess. That's how I fix that up. Now, it's not going to work in every single case, and you might have to retweak things, but this is just, again, one of those little things that you can use to kind of maybe speed up your process just a bit. Alright, so now that I've got that, let's finish up the slimming up this character. It's a bit bulkier than I'd like. Now I'm just going to go into the smooths, into the soft selection now. It's going to turn off the cage, because I never really like that much. At least not those default colors. So I've got a polygon selected, and I've got soft selection activated. What soft selection does, like you may have seen in the previous few steps, is it basically grabs and selects softly as it extends out, so that you can have a nice smoother change. Now this is really big. This is bigger than I need, so let's pull down the fallout down to 0. And if you see a spinner at max, most times if you right click it, it'll reset it to its default position, which in most cases is 0. I'm just going to drag it back up. So got those. And as you can see, it's grabbing into here. See, with the soft selection, I believe the soft selection by default, without the edge distance, will go from a point radiating outwards. So if I was to select that, the thumb, it's reaching out over towards the finger. It's almost like it's a sphere that's enveloping it. This is going to cause problems, because if you just wanted to move the thumb and not the actual other finger on the hand, this is where you'd put on edge distance. Now, edge distance will work on top of this, or of the smooth selections, so that it'll basically extend the effect out however many edges you want to go. So without the edge distance, we're grabbing the finger, and with the edge distance, we're only grabbing the thumb. So I'm going to do that over here. Let's pull it down, because I don't want it to grab into the shoulder. 2, 1, and tweak that. I'm just going to relax it a bit. Grab that one. Grab those. Let's relax it a bit more. Alright, now let's go in here. Let's relax that a bit. Smooth that out. And smooth that out. And this is with the holding the boundary points turned off, as you noticed. And this is mainly just using the relax tool as well, so let's just play around. Oops. Alright, there. Grab that. And let's fix up the butt. Now, if you use this process, you are definitely going to have to go ahead and readjust a lot of things as you go. You might need to make a lot of fixes, a lot of changes, but again, this isn't going to get you the final product. This is just going to shave off a couple extra steps on your process. So instead of having to redo a lot of things, you can just basically go in and tweak and adjust as needed. Let's grab some of the neck. Relax that down, pull it in, and let's pull this down. I might actually want to pull that entire head right up a bit. Yeah, let's just do it that way. Just a bit. Alright, now as you can see, looking at them side by side, even though this one is a work in progress, and you do need to, I do need to do some some modeling correction. As you can see, they look pretty much quite different from each other now. And this is pretty much one of the ways that you can use to get a lot of variance. So as you can see, I managed to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 models, plus this one makes 8. And that's all with pretty much about a weekend's worth of hardcore working. Now, I did have to start off with the underlying model, which I believe this one is the one that started it. But after that, I've gone ahead and I've tweaked and I've adjusted, and I've managed to get a whole bunch of different body types. Now, of course, the heads were, when I needed to model and change the heads were remodeled or pushed and tweaked a lot. So, but as you can see, this is a great way that you can use to kind of shave down some of the costs, the amount of time that it takes to work on this. But don't expect super excellent results right off. It's going to take time and practice. So, but again, if you're just learning and if you wanted to do a kit, easiest thing you can do. So let's say I like the head on this character here. Let's grab the polygons in the head. And it doesn't need to be neat or tidy, but just enough to actually get you the idea of what you want to look for. There. And when I've got that, all I got to do is just hold down Shift, drag it to make a copy, clone it to an object. Let's call it geohead. And oops, select it and go File, Export Selected, and go Test Head Export. Let's try this. Now this is sometimes where I have a difficult time because I'm not exactly the expert. I'm not an expert. I'm going to say that many times over because I'm always learning. Alright, so now that I've got that saved out, let's go into a new file. Let's save as. Because I don't want to lose the work that I've got. And let's go into this file. Alright, so import. And let's go into scenes. Let's try this. And there it is. So right then and there, I've been able to export the head, and as you can tell, it doesn't have the symmetry on it, but let's just drop a symmetry modifier in there. And as you can see, this is a head from a previous one, and all I would really need to do to incorporate it into a new model is to just basically stitch it back together. And the best part is that if you're working with the UVs on this, so long as you're not actually changing around the underlying structure of the geometry too much, the UVs should, for the most part, be relatively preserved. Now, you're still going to have to go in and tweak and adjust and modify and all that type of fun stuff, but if I already had this head unwrapped, the way that the UV system works is basically you have each vertex has its own unique identifier or an index. I'm not exactly sure exactly how it handles it under the hood, but it's each vertex is like, say, vertex number 1 or vertex number 2 or vertex number 3, and it's at XYZ coordinates. It's connected to vertex such and such and such. But when it comes to the UVs, each vertex basically has an index, and it's got, like, say, this vertex is at U and V on the texture coordinates, and U and V is basically like X and Y. It's simple planar. So if you don't go ahead and if you don't cut out or add too much geometry with something that's already been unwrapped, you can still, for the most part, see some of the source UVs. Now, I don't have this one unwrapped quite yet, so let's go back into this file, and I'll show you what I mean. Now, I did mess around with the UVs a little bit on this one, but as you can see, for the most part, the hand is preserved. So let's go and it's going to make a clone of that, because again, I don't want to lose work. Save your work often. Alright, so I'm just going to move that over here, hide unselected, focus in. Alright, so what do I mean? Let's just collapse it too, so that I've collapsed all the UVs down to the base. And let's just take a quick little peek, make sure it's still there. Yep, as you can see. Now, the rest of the UVs I have, as you can tell, I haven't unwrapped it, but these UVs are still there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go get rid of that first. I'm going to go into this spot here, and I'm going to remove. Actually, let's chamfer that instead. That's a quicker way of adding geometry. Now, as you can see, I've basically created a whole bunch more vertices in there. So now if we take a look at the unwrap UV, open UV editor, it's still roughly there. It's not exactly perfect, but it's doing its best to interpolate where the UV coordinates are. Now, here's where it's going to get fun. Let's delete that. Let's take this finger and extrude it, because this one, it still did its best to try and interpolate where the UVs were, because we weren't actually creating too much more external. But if we were to use, like, say, an extrude that out a couple times, and then if we were to take a look at the unwrapped UVs, let's open it up. Oh, wait. Open UV editor. And as you can see, now the fingertip is, it's doing it, again, it's doing its best to try and interpolate what you've got here, but it's not all that happy with what we just did. So if you're working with a previously unwrapped object, you may very well likely have to go in and readjust some of the vertices in the UV editor, and you might have to tweak the unwrapping, but you can get yourself at least halfway started if it's already unwrapped. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you should go out of your way to unwrap absolutely everything that you intend to put into a kit, but if it's already unwrapped, you shouldn't have to worry too much. So long as you don't go crazy with the vertices, and you shouldn't have to worry too much about fixing it up in the end. And this will save you time, because for me, hands are a pain in the ass to unwrap because it's a lot of complex geometry. Sometimes they're easy. Sometimes they're exceptionally easy. But other times they can be a nightmare, because when you try and relax them and make sure that it's not stretching in all the bad spots, you might have overlaps, or you might have places where if you try and relax it, it kind of munches it up. Excuse me. So all in all, it's if you have something that's already unwrapped and you want to work with that in your kit, by all means, go for it. Just keep in mind that you're probably going to have to go back in and adjust things. And again, as you can tell, this isn't what I would really consider my best work per se when it comes to arms. Like, I mean, I did work with it to try and get a good silhouette, because since I'm working with low poly, I don't have to worry about turbo smooth or anything. And even though this does need some work, in all reality, this is about as big as you would ever expect to see it on the screen. So I didn't need to worry too much about it being perfect, but I did want to make sure that it has a nice silhouette. Oh, and if you are curious, a good way of getting a nice silhouette, if you want to work in that type of method, just turn off the lighting. This one's consistent colors, and I'm going to turn off the ambient occlusion. In previous versions of Max, this would be the flat shaded. And as you can see, you don't actually see the any lighting or shading. You just see the plain ordinary silhouettes. So I'm just going to unhide everything. And this is a great way of working, especially if you got low poly. If you're working low poly like I am, and I'm not talking like current gen low poly. I'm talking like 10 years ago low poly, because the reason I'm working as low as I possibly can is because I want this game to work on a lower end systems if at all possible, because I don't want people to have to complain that they're having to upgrade their computer just to play the game. So, and when you're doing low poly, it's you should work more for the silhouette, because the silhouette is pretty much going to be the first thing that the player sees. Now you can put textures on, but if you can get a good modeling flow going where you're getting a good silhouette, it looks good. It's got a nice presence. Like here, it's difficult to say that if it's an anthropomorphic tiger, because anthropomorphic tigers are a niche thing in a sense, like Tony the Tiger and all those others. But you can tell this is a masculine character. It's got a slightly cartoonish body in terms of its aesthetic and its form. And it's got a fairly good silhouette. Now, once I get to the texturing process, I'll actually start painting in some shadows, because I'll do some of that manually, because if the main thing with this game is that I wanted to get away with as little information being put on there, so I'm only working with just the diffuse map. Everything else is parametrically generated or modeled by hand or fudged. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it for this one, how to kit bash, what you can do with the kit bash. And yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Oh, and one other thing that I mentioned in a previous video that I kind of taken down, but I thought, yeah, I should probably actually say this, is if you do want to do this professionally, you really need to make sure that you know someone who is willing to go to bat for you legally. I don't want to necessarily put in any scare tactics or anything else like that, but there are a lot of people who don't know what the hell they're doing, and there are a lot of people that will try and be complete dicks to you. All the way from refusing to pay you for the work that you've done, refusing to pay you for the time that you've invested, trying to weasel their way out of having to pay you. And 90% of the time, it's all about money or ownership of the materials. So if you do want to get into this, I would strongly recommend that you learn up on the legal stuff. And here's another thing. Do not ever, ever, ever think that you can represent yourself unless you have an ironclad contract. Like a contract where you would take it to a lawyer, a legal expert, and if they look through it and they say, I can find nothing wrong with that, then that means that you have a relatively ironclad contract. Chances are, however, though, any contract that you sign in this industry, there's going to be options in there that are probably going to be in there, like such as non-compete clauses or other things like that. Now, a non-compete clause is not so bad, but it is going to cause you some problems, especially if you want to start a kit with objects that you've worked with for a company. That even if they don't take them at the very end, like for example, if you go through like say 4 or 5 iterations and they only take the third iteration and they say we don't want the others, you can use those for your kit so long as you are not infringing upon their rights. And the reason why you would be infringing upon their rights is if they had you agree to a non-compete or something else like that. I call it the we own your stuff clause. And it's basically one of those things where companies will say, you know what, while you're working for us, we want to own possession of the things, just so that you can't actually play both sides of the industry, for example, and say go work for their direct competitors. It's happened before, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but companies generally tend not to appreciate it when you're working for their competition as well as them. It's a conflict of interest. And it's not exactly the most ethical thing to do, but I guess if you really want to do it and there's nothing and you haven't agreed and there are no contracts or conduct codes of conducts that you've agreed to abide that explicitly forbid it, I guess you could get away with it, but it's not going to work out very well, because at the end of the day, if they find out and you do end up losing your contract, you can't put them down as a reference. And that's pretty much all that it's about, because if you can't put down, say for example, if you're working for Blizzard, I mean, this is one of the juggernauts of the industry. If you're working for Blizzard, you put in 4 years, you are one of the star players, but at the last year you ended up getting fired because you decided to work for Activision on the side, and that was in violation. Even if that wasn't in violation of a non-compete clause, they could say, you know what, it's unethical, we don't appreciate it, and as such, we're going to have to terminate your contract because we can't have you working for our competitors. That basically means that you can't put them on your resume. You can't put that on your CV or whatever the heck it's called, because at the end of the day, you've got to be able the reason why you put them on your resume is so that they can vouch for your ability and your ability to do the job. If you burn that reference, they won't vouch for you. And in fact, it might actually end up end up shooting yourself in the foot because of it. Because if you put down someone who you've worked for who you really shouldn't have because it ended badly, even if you were completely in the right, legally speaking, you still are asking, if you put them down as a reference, you're asking them to vouch for you. And if you put them down and they vouch for you and they say that you are not the type of employee that they would want to rehire or anything like that, then you've basically kissed 4 years of experience at one of the best juggernauts in the industry goodbye. You now have a 4-year gap that you cannot realistically put down. Now, some people will say, well, what did you do in that time? And you say, well, I worked for Blizzard, but unfortunately, some people will look past that because a lot of the good studios will look at what you can do. And if you're a little bit of a troublemaker, or if you're not exactly all that great of a person interpersonally and all that type of stuff, or if you have like one of your chips on your shoulder, if you have a chip on your shoulder, which is the issue that I see the most, people tend to have a chip on their shoulder, whether it's be I'm the greatest modeler or this company burned me and they suck and I hate them and everything that they've touched and that type of thing. Chips on the shoulder are hard to deal with because it basically means that the employee is going to kind of be a little bit more hostile than is needed. Now, in some cases, yes, it is valid to, for example, if you end up getting a job at, say, well, since we're using Blizzard as an example, if you're working for Blizzard and they end up restructuring and you end up getting teamed up with the worst people imaginable, bullies, arrogant, and it's okay. I don't necessarily where I was going with that, but yeah, this is why this is a bit of a ramble. But yeah, so I guess the long takeaway from all this is don't burn your bridges. Make sure you have a lawyer on hand, or at least someone that you know that's willing to actually go to bat for you legally, even if it costs you. Because sooner or later, especially if you're a freelancer, you're going to find a situation where things aren't going to be exactly all that good. So you're going to want to have a good defense. And unless you've got an ironclad defense, like what I explained earlier, you're going to want a lawyer. Because if you try and represent yourself and your defense is even remotely, if it has even the smallest hole that could be poked into it, that could end up to your detriment. And I've seen some fantastic people get screwed over that way. One such person, he ended up basically not getting paid for 2 to 3 years worth of work because, well, after factoring in the costs of what it cost him to actually pursue them to cough up the rest of the money that they owed him. So yeah, know someone who can go to bat for you legally, and keep your nose clean. And that's okay. Yeah, I'm totally rambling at this point. Sorry about that, but yeah, I hope you have a great one. I hope you've learned a little bit. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'll do my best. I'm going to try and be a little bit more engaged with everyone here from here on out because, well, I've got a channel, may as well use it. But yeah, I hope you have a great one, and I'll catch you later. Bye.